I'm watching this as part of the Godzilla movie marathon, where I'll be taking a look at all the Toho live-action Godzilla movies. Check out the description for more details. It's easy to underestimate the cultural significance of a film which went on to inspire 28 sequels and counting, several American reimaginings, a mainstream cartoon, several fan-made productions, references in countless other TV and film series, plus the animated short Bambi Meets Godzilla. Godzilla is a household name across the world, and despite his many different incarnations, still manages to be incredibly recognizable. Although many of the sequels are far from great, and maybe a bit silly, the original 1954 film is a serious piece of cinema, dark in tone and politically loaded. On paper, Gojira sounds like B-movie material, but director Ishiro Honda had a history of making documentaries and implemented a documentary style to his later films. This grounds Gojira as a sincere piece of dramatic cinema. The human element to the film gives it soul, and the central love story between Amito and Agata feels authentic, with Honda capturing interactions which feel natural and nuanced rather than melodramatic. Their relationship seems youthful and full of post-war modernism. Amito even eschews old-fashioned notions and breaks off an engagement with her father's colleague. That colleague happens to be Dr. Serizawa, the other hero of the film. Serizawa, the eye-patch-wearing, enigmatic genius whose research is alluded to but kept from us until later in the film. In a film of strong characters, Serizawa perhaps stands out the most. He's certainly the most memorable. Maybe it's the eye patch. Like with Western cinema at the time, actors tended to belong to the studio, and Akira Takarada, Ogata, would become a Toho legend and appear in many more Godzilla films. He's even credited in Garth Edwards' 2014 Hollywood Godzilla movie, but criminally, he gets no screen time in the final cut. Akihiko Hirata, Dr. Serizawa, would also star in many Toho films, and Momoko Kochi, Amika, would play the same character over 40 years later. Although Takarada and Hirata would go on to become big names in Japanese cinema, Takashi Shimura, the eminent professor in the film, was already a major star in 1954, having worked alongside Akira Kurosawa, one of the most important filmmakers of the 20th century. Don't worry, I'm going to discuss Godzilla himself in a moment, but the truth is, we don't see much of him for quite some time. We have a few glimpses, but his first big scene isn't until halfway through the film, but when it happens, it's nearly half an hour of constantly amazing effects. Although we may not see him, he always has a presence. Like John Williams' Jaws theme puts the shark in the film even when we can't see it, Godzilla's footsteps are ever present and generate tension. The film even opens with Godzilla's footsteps and the sound of his roar, both created by Akira Ifukube. Ifukube's contributions to the Godzilla films cannot be overstated. Ifukube was an accomplished classical composer, and his music and sound effects are embedded in the very essence of what Godzilla is. From Godzilla's roar, Godzilla's ominous theme music, and his bombastic military march. Anyway, Godzilla. A great bit of pseudoscience sets a precedent for many of the Godzilla films. Scientific theory is simply accepted as fact, although it has to be said that at least Professor Yamane presents several pieces of evidence for his theory here, that a surviving dinosaur was mutated by H-bomb radiation. Godzilla himself is scary. Over the years, he'd mutate into a child-friendly, cute monster, but here, he is wild. The animalistic behavior is perfectly depicted when he starts snapping his jaws at a clock tower before toppling it over with his clawed hands. The iconic design is firmly established here. The general shape of the body and the rows of spines, the atomic breath with glowing effect. This is considered one of the best Godzilla suits. In profile, it's practically perfect, with well-proportioned limbs and a muscular stature. The only moments which aren't as convincing are when a hand puppet is used to animate the head at times, and it looks a little wonky. The puppet does look distinctly different from the actual suit head, but that even happens 3 decades later, when we get animatronic heads. We all want to see destruction in a monster movie, and Gojira does not disappoint. This was the highest budget Japanese film ever made when it was released, and you can see why. The miniature work is exceptional. Eiji Tsuburaya's guidance set new benchmarks for visual effects. I've talked about Honda and Ifukube, but Tsuburaya is the final piece of this creative trifecta of talent. For those not familiar with Tsuburaya, he would eventually become one of the most crucial figures in tokusatsu, a Japanese term for entertainment with lots of visual special effects. His pioneering miniature work was so fantastic that his visual effects for wartime propaganda films were mistaken for actual footage because it was so realistic. After watching the 1933 movie King Kong, he longed to make a monster film of his own, so Godzilla was a real passion project for him, and like Honda, he took his role as visual effects director very seriously. Gojira effectively had two directors, Honda focusing on the human story and controlling the narrative, and Tsuburaya making the implausible believable. You really don't have to suspend belief that much here. I mean, there's no flying robots for a start, but everything looks so convincing. Yes, modern audiences are used to more sophisticated effects, and the truth is that the grainy black and white picture does hide some flaws, but there's no denying that the special effects are a spectacle. The pylons stretching for miles look incredibly realistic, and I still watch in awe as Godzilla melts those same steel pylons designed to kill him with his atomic breath. The way they glow and twist and buckle, it's incredible. 70 years on, this is still a superb visual effect. Sure, you can see some of the strings in the aeroplane shots, but it's still technically impressive, and for audiences 70 years ago, this wouldn't have been a concern, because this wouldn't have been watched on a 1080p Criterion Collection remastered Blu-ray. There are so many incredible scenes to love in the main invasion scene by Godzilla, including the hero shot of him chomping on a train. There's great shots of Godzilla stomping through the city. There are fires, really big fires, even more fires, explosions, crashes, and an amazing scene where Godzilla topples a bridge and causes flooding. And it's not just monster action. In one of the film's most somber moments, a woman clutching her children is surrounded by Godzilla's destruction. Abandoning all hope, she tearfully accepts that they are about to die and tries to comfort her babies. It's more heart-wrenching than any explosions or atomic breath. There's a reason why Gojira is so potent in its horror. The truth is, it's not really about the monster. When watching the 1954 Gojira, it's important to consider the zeitgeist. This was released only weeks after American thermonuclear weapons irradiated a Japanese fishing boat and caused a national security scandal. Public paranoia over nuclear weapons was justifiably high. It was only 9 years since the atomic blasts in Japan which catalyzed the end of the Second World War. For many in Japan, this was the first time they had seen the destructive force of atomic energy. From 1939, the government controlled the film industry to produce propaganda, and after the war, American occupation of Japan ended only in 1952. Until this time, the media was strictly controlled and sanitized. The stark images of H-bomb aftermath were shown only outside of Japan. The true horror of Godzilla isn't the shock of a massive reptile rampaging through Tokyo, it's the effects of atomic energy which go beyond fiction, and this film enabled audiences to get a glimpse of what that may have looked like. The visual effects employed to portray the destruction is hauntingly similar to the after effects of the atomic bombs. Godzilla himself is part of that atomic byproduct, a giant metaphor for uncontrollable force. Central to the film are the moral arguments around destructive force, be it Godzilla's right to live or die, the aftermath of atomic weapon use, or Dr. Serizawa's discovery, which will be a crucial part of the film's conclusion. Ethics and accountability are openly discussed by the characters. Serizawa says that as a human being, he cannot risk adding another terrifying weapon to humanity's already horrific collection. The atomic bombs dropped on Japan were the most indiscriminately destructive weapons ever used. The shadows of those mushroom clouds hang over this film. Godzilla is a film about mankind having to accept accountability for its shameful weaponizing of technology. We are both the monster and the solution. Solid acting, inspired directing, a visual effects legend, and a score by an accomplished classical composer, Gojira takes a B-movie premise and uses A-list artists to redefine the genre and create a genuine masterpiece. After being under government control during the Second World War, and then regulated by the American occupation, 12 years of suppressed creativity burst free, and the golden age of Japanese cinema began. Godzilla would have won the Japanese Movie Association Award for Best Picture, were it not for Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai. 1954 really was a great year for Japanese cinema. The closing moments of Gojira are a direct message to the viewer, a warning that there will be more Godzillas if we continue to destroy ourselves with acts of war.